Starting off this countdown, we have the alien abduction. Back in 1956, an American Air Force Sergeant, Jonathan P. Lovett, and Major William Cunningham went out searching for debris from a recent missile launch in New Mexico. That's when Cunningham heard Lovett let out a huge scream. When he rushed over to help him, he claims he saw Lovett being pulled up by a UFO hovering above him. Lovett was then pulled inside the craft and it took off. Cunningham radioed for help, and when they arrived, they found him in complete shock and he was taken to the hospital. They then started to investigate the incident. According to the military, there was an unidentified object in that area detected on their radar, so Cunningham was telling the truth. Here's where it gets even more messed up though. 3 days later, Lovett's body was found 10 miles away. It was severely mutilated and drained completely of blood. So could it be that he literally was taken away by aliens and then killed by them? What makes this even more suspicious is that the government report on this just vanished into thin air. In our 9th spot, we have the Gorman Dogfight UFO. This is said to be one of the most well-known UFO encounters from the 20th century. It's also a fairly credible one. So on October 1st, 1948, US Air Force pilot George Gorman was out flying when he spotted a UFO below him. He described it as a flying disc with round and well-defined edges that was brightly lit and circling slowly over the city. What was weird was that the object was not showing up on radar. So Gorman decided to follow it, but as he got closer to the object, it got brighter and then it shot away from him. He said it went around 250 miles per hour, then increased to 600 miles an hour. Due to its speed, Gorman lost sight of it. Now the government was all like, it's just a weather balloon. Yeah right, I think an experienced aviator would know the difference between a weather balloon and a flying saucer. In our 8th spot, we have the Pentagon. Last year, the Pentagon released footage of what they confirmed to be a UFO. I'm pretty sure by now you have all seen this video, but if you haven't, I'll share it with you today. So the UFO was captured on camera by 2 naval aviators who were shocked at what they saw.
There's a whole fleet of them, look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
So in the videos you can see what appears to be a UFO flying in the sky. In the video you can hear just how shocked the pilots are at what they're seeing.
Look at that thing, dude.
In fact, one of the pilots that witnessed this told CNN that the disc moved in ways he couldn't explain. Apparently, 1 second it was there and then next thing you know, it disappeared. He said, and I quote, "As I got close to it, it rapidly accelerated to the south and then disappeared in less than 2 seconds. This was extremely abrupt, like a ping pong ball bouncing off a wall. It would hit and go the other way." Moving on to number 7, we have the Topcliffe UFO. On September 19th in 1952, half a dozen Royal Air Force officers were taking part of NATO exercises when they encountered a UFO. So the men were headed back in their fighter jet when crew members on the ground saw a weird, silvery, circular object traveling several thousands of feet above the jet. One of the witnesses said, and I quote, "The acceleration was in excess of that of a shooting star. I have never seen such a phenomenon before. The movements of the object were not identifiable with anything I have seen in the air." The craft then started to descend close to the fighter jet. They said it was, and I quote, "swinging in a pendular motion, similar to a falling sycamore leaf." At first, they thought it was a parachute or something that had fallen off of the jet. That was until it stopped midair, began to spin, and then just zoomed away. This sighting was then leaked to the press and was the front cover of the newspapers for quite some time. In fact, this sighting was so insane that Prime Minister Winston Churchill wanted to know more about it and get an investigation going. In our 6th spot, we have the destroyed evidence. On the morning of July 24th, 1948, 2 pilots were flying from Houston to Atlanta with their 20 passengers. That's when all of a sudden they saw a UFO flying clear as day by them. This was witnessed by the 2 pilots and 1 of the passengers. The others were asleep when this happened. One of the pilots said, and I quote, "It was clear there were no wings present, that it was powered by some jet or other type of power, shooting flame from the rear some 50 feet. There were 2 rows of windows which indicated an upper and lower deck, and from inside these windows a very bright light was glowing. Underneath the ship there was a blue glow of light." Now they all watched this for about 10 seconds until it disappeared. disappeared. Obviously, they reported their findings, and this triggered a top-secret investigation by the US government. In the end, their findings were destroyed, which means this could be a real UFO sighting, because if it wasn't, they wouldn't have destroyed the evidence. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the White House UFO. Back in the 1940s and 50s, there were a number of UFO sightings in the skies over Washington, D.C. It all started back in 1947 when a search and rescue pilot reported 9 saucer-like discs flying together at over 1,000 miles per hour. Within weeks, the same flying saucer sighting was reported in 40 other states. The strangest incident happened to an air traffic controller in 1952. On July 19th, Edward Nugent, working as an air traffic controller at Washington National Airport, spotted 7 slow-moving objects on his radar. They were located far from any of their flight paths. Now, he made a joke being like, "Oh look, they're flying saucers," until he realized that that's probably what they actually were. At that same time, 2 more air traffic controllers saw a strange hovering bright light in the distance. Now, they did send out jets to the area, but as soon as they got to the area where the objects were on the radar, they disappeared. Over the next couple of weeks, more and more UFOs were spotted. It got to the point where people were demanding answers. In our 4th spot, we have Britain's Roswell. This is said to be the UK's most famous UFO incident. So in December of 1980 in Rendlesham Forest, England, a number of people reported seeing unexplained lights and then a weird spacecraft land. It all started on December 26 when a security man saw strange lights descend into the forest. As he approached this object, it moved through the trees and the animals at a farm nearby went crazy. The following days, more and more people saw these lights. In fact, a number of credible US Air Force officials were witnesses to this account, including Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt. The lieutenant himself confirmed it to be a UFO. In our 3rd spot, we have the 6 soldiers. This next UFO encounter took place in North Korea in 1951 during the Korean War. As the men were preparing to bombard a nearby village, they were all of a sudden greeted by a strange craft. The craft emitted some form of ray that made their airburst start to explode. According to one of the men, and I quote, "Objects would get right into the center of an airburst of artillery and yet remain unharmed." They also said that they were, and I quote, "swept by some form of a ray that was emitted in pulses, in waves that you could visually see only when it was aiming directly at you." That is to say, like a searchlight sweeps around and the segments of light, you would see it coming at you. After this weird attack, the men were left sick and had to be taken to the hospital. Some say that they were attacked by a UFO. Others say they were attacked by a high-tech Soviet death ray. To this day, we still don't know. Moving on to number 2, we have the Mantell UFO Incident. Named after Captain Thomas F. Mantell, a Kentucky Air National Guard pilot who sadly lost his life chasing a UFO. So on January 7th, 1948, Godman Army Airfield at Fort Knox received a report of a weird aerial object near Madisonville, Kentucky. They claim it was a floating circular object around 250 to 300 feet in diameter. So the US Air Force sent Thomas to investigate. Sadly, while doing so, he crashed his plane and lost his life. Now, Thomas was a very experienced pilot. He had spent around 2,167 hours in the air, so it's not like him to just crash like that. Other people that saw the UFO claimed it was very white with red borders at the bottom. Some even said, and I quote, "Just before leaving it came to very near the ground, staying down for about 10 seconds, then climbed at a very fast rate back to its original altitude, 10,000 feet, leveling off and disappearing into the overcast, heading 120 degrees. Its speed was greater than 100 miles per hour in level flight." And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Roswell UFO. This is said to be the most famous UFO case in America. So it takes place during the summer of 1947. A rancher named W.W. MacBrazel said he found wreckage on his big plot of land. In fact, during that time, there was a number of UFO sightings, so the rancher thought that the wreckage was from a UFO crash. So he brought that material to the sheriff, who brought it to an officer from the US Army Air Force. Later, the US Army announced that what the rancher found was a flying disc. But the following day, the US Army quickly reversed themselves, and they were like, no, it's not a UFO, it's actually just debris from a weather balloon. Years later, in 1994, they admitted that the weather balloon story had been completely bogus. Over the years, hundreds of UFO sightings have been reported in that area. Several eyewitnesses also claimed that they saw alien bodies being taken from a government test site. But the government was like, nah, those are just test dummies. Yeah, we'll go with that. I don't know, there's a number of conspiracy theories surrounding Roswell. It seems like the government might be hiding aliens there. Starting off this countdown, we have Leah Haley. In 1990, a woman named Leah Haley was randomly abducted by aliens. She remembers being on a spacecraft in a round room surrounded by bright lights. When she woke up, she found herself lying on her back on an examination table. Weird alien-type figures surrounded her. Later, she decided to undergo hypnosis to try and remember more information about her abduction. And that's when she realized that the military might have had something to do with this. She also started to remember fellow abductees who she later would meet in real life. When Leah started to say that the military was involved in her abduction, she was actually abducted by members of the US military and interrogated. They apparently told her not to tell anyone or else they would kill her. Then over the years, she was offered jobs randomly by total strangers for positions at nearby military bases. So she believes that she was chosen by the military for a reason. Although the military threatened her in 1992, she published a book titled Lost Was the Key, and it's all about her alien abduction experience. Coming in at number 9, we have Myrna Hansen. In 1980, a mother named Myrna Hansen and her 6-year-old son Sean were headed home from Oklahoma when they approached a pasture. That's when all of a sudden they saw a beam shoot down from the sky and drag cows up into the air. When the UFO realized that Hansen and her son witnessed this, they abducted them. Through hypnosis, she was able to remember being taken to a deep underground military base. In fact, she was able to describe its location in great detail, to the point where members of the Air Force office started following her and her son around. Clearly, they were scared that she was onto them. Moving on to number 8, we have the member of the military. So in 1982, a man whose name was concealed for protection purposes was stationed on a military base in New Brunswick. Let's just call him Steven. So one night, Steven's friend and girlfriend left the base to go watch Tron in theaters. An hour later, they were back already. Their car had been smashed. Apparently, they were driving along a stretch of the highway to the movies when they saw a bunch of strange lights coming over a hill. A bunch of cars pulled over to check out the lights, including this dude and his girlfriend. That's when they saw a large disc with flashing lights fly up into the sky. Everyone ran back to get into their car and to drive away. As they were driving away, the craft crashed into the side of some cars, including these guys. A few days later, men in black showed up at the base looking for Steven and his friend. They told them that they better keep their mouths shut and to never tell anyone if they wanted to keep their military careers. Moving on to number 7, we have Robert Richardson. In 1967 in Ohio, Robert Richardson collided with a UFO while driving. However, after impact, the object disappeared without a trace. The only thing they left behind was a small lump of metal from their craft. A week later, he was visited by 2 men in black suits who told him to cough up the piece of metal he collected from the scene of the crash, which was hella sketchy because number 1, how did they know about the accident? And number 2, how did they know that he picked up this piece of metal? Richardson said that he gave the metal to the authorities for testing. The men told him if he was lying, they would kill his wife. Thankfully, he never heard from these men again. In our 6th spot, we have the abductee named Linda. One day, a woman named Linda Napolitano woke up floating mid-air above her bed. She looked around and saw some strange figures by her bed watching her. The next thing she remembers is being on board a craft where these figures were experimenting on her. Some of them looked like aliens, others were humans. Eventually, Linda decided to come forward about her experience and share it with the public. But upon doing so, 2 men kidnapped and interrogated her multiple times. This led her to believe that her abductions were either planned by the government, which makes sense as to why she saw both alien figures and human figures, or the military knows that aliens are real and are trying to learn more about them through the abductees. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Melinda Leslie. Melinda Leslie from Orange County, California leads a support group for alien abductees. More than than 36 of her attendees say that they have been taken aboard an alien spacecraft and then later have been re-abducted by apparent military personnel and then subjected to physical examinations and interrogations. She herself has been a victim of this. She remembers humans in a flying triangle abducting her and taking her to an underground testing facility. There, a number of men in hazmat suits ran extensive tests on her. Eventually, she was abducted a second time, this time by a red-haired military captain who told her to tell him everything she knew about aliens. Coming in at number 4, we have the Roswell UFO. Roswell, New Mexico is famous for their UFO sightings. This is the hotspot for aliens, apparently. Or maybe it's because the military has a secret underground alien base there. Well, in 1947, a rancher named W.W. Mac Brazel said he found wreckage on his big plot of land. In fact, during that time, there were a number of UFO sightings, so the rancher thought that the wreckage was from a UFO crash. So he brought that material to the sheriff, who brought it to an officer from the US Army Air Force. Later, the US Army announced that what the rancher found was a flying disc. But the following day, the US military quickly backtracked. And they were like, no, it's not a UFO. It's actually just, debris from a weather balloon. Then, years later in 1994, they admitted that the weather balloon story was completely bogus. Now, this isn't exactly an alien abduction story, but it's a real story of the military caught lying and covering up their tracks. Moving on to number 3, we have the Cornfield. This next story comes from a man who grew up on a cornfield. Their name was never released due to privacy reasons, but for our sake, let's just call him Bob. So one night, Bob saw something fly down from the sky and hover right above their farm. It was shaped like a rectangle and it was glowing light. Then it left as fast as it came. The next day, Bob and his family were greeted by 2 men in black suits with dark sunglasses. They said they needed to inspect the farm because there was a supposed natural gas leak. It was very strange because mostly everything on the farm was run by solar energy. Alas, the men were from the government, so Bob was like, okay, your authority, you know best, knock your socks off. The men then went out to the area where the UFO had been the night prior. Now, Bob did tell the men what he had seen. The 2 men said that if he ever repeated that, he was going to be arrested for endangering people. Like, what is going on, and why is the military so sus? In our second spot, we have the test subject. Ever since Caitlin was younger, she remembers being abducted by aliens. At first, she thought she just had a wild imagination as a kid or was a vivid dreamer. That was until she was abducted again when she was an adult. She remembers being taken from her bed by weird men, and then waking up on an examination table surrounded by bright lights. She could not move or scream. She knew she had been drugged. The next thing she remembers is feeling something really hot on her face. The men around her were doing something to her face. Months later, she decided to share her story with the world. And immediately upon doing so, she was visited by 2 strange men who told her she better tell the press everything she was saying was made up, or else she would pay the consequences. Fearing for her life, Caitlin refused to talk about her story to anyone ever again, and declined any follow-up interviews. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Kendall Falk. Kendall is another woman who has been abducted a number of times throughout her life. At first, she thought these abductions were by real aliens. Later, she was able to debunk her own abductions and realize the truth. Kendall believes that she was targeted by the military due to her mental health issues. This makes her an easy target in their eyes because, sadly, people will find it harder to validate her claims. She remembers during one abduction, she was taken from her home in a UFO craft. Later, she was able to remember that it was a car that pulled into her driveway, not a UFO. She remembers standing in her driveway and seeing this alien get out of the car and come towards her. Now she remembers how weird this alien was. It walked very robotic. And she believes that that's because it was in fact a robot. The military used this so that Kendall would think it was a real alien abduction. They later took her and brought her back to a facility where tests were done on her. This is absolutely wild. Is it true? Is the military faking alien abductions just to run tests on us? This is mind-blowing.
It's coming in at number 10. We have Project Twinkle. A number of green fireballs in the sky over United States military bases promoted Project Twinkle in 1949. On the evening of December 5th, 1948, 2 plane crashes, one military in Albuquerque and one civilian in Las Vegas, reported that they had seen green balls of fire. The military crew reported that the light was huge, like a green meteor that strangely curved upwards rather than hurtling to Earth. On top of that, just 3 days later, 2 United States Air Force of Special Investigations workers witnessed a green fireball when they were flying an aircraft. Throughout December of that year, more Air Force workers saw the phenomenon. Then, on January 30th, 1949, the biggest and most widely seen green fireball was sighted near Roswell. Hello. This led to the Air Force classifying the instance as top secret. Now, a year after the first fireball was spotted, Project Twinkle began. Twinkle was able to record a few events, but the data was inconclusive. Goodness gracious, green balls of fire, right? Coming in at number 9, we have the Pori Finnish Air Force sighting. The Finnish Air Force have only ever officially acknowledged one UFO sighting, and that was in April 1969 in Pori. 7 yellow disc-shaped objects were seen hovering in a formation above Pori Airport. When a fighter pilot was scrambled to intercept the UFOs, they accelerated away at an incredible speed. In the same minute, they were spotted on radar 200 kilometers away, which is nigh on impossible. A plane chased after them at 700 kilometers an hour, but they were not able to catch up. There was actually an Oscar award-winning documentary about the case called Visitors from Space, which you should check out. Links again in the description. Ooh, this is a good one. Coming into number 8, we have Foo Fighters. And no, I don't mean the awesome band fronted by Dave Grohl. Also good though. I mean the UFO sightings by Allied pilots in World War II. The 415th Squadron, a United States Air Force unit, were flying over the Rhine in Germany in November 1944 when they saw multicolored lights they described being like Christmas lights, but in the sky. The objects flew alongside their aircraft at 200 miles per hour. They were described as being red, orange, green, and white. They appeared singularly, but sometimes they would appear in formations of 10. It was also said that they could outmaneuver the aeroplanes they were flying against. The squadron then called it in. Historian Richard Zybart said, "The pilots were very professional. They gave the report, they talked about the lights, but they didn't speculate about them." Foo Fighters were also seen by the 8th Air Force of the United Kingdom over Belgium, and again by the United States Air Forces in the South Pacific by the military in the 1960s. At the time, there were theories that actually they were a secret Nazi weapon, or indeed aliens. To this day, we don't know who or what the Foo Fighters were. All my life I've been searching for something, something never comes, never leads to aliens. I think that's what Dave Grohl was trying to tell us. Coming into number 7, we have ghost rockets. Swedish military defense were on high alert when they spotted rockets in February 1946, some 5 months after the First World War informally ended. About 2,000 sightings were logged between May and December 1946 by military personnel, but just 200 were recorded on radar. The Swedish army released a photograph of one of the rockets, which is still an unsolved mystery to this day. No targets were ever reported to have been struck, but at the time, it was thought that they were long-range test missiles from the Soviets. This was largely rejected though, because fragments were never officially found. Reports were made of objects crashing into lakes. A witness even saw a grey rocket fall into Lake Kolmarv in June of 1946. The Swedish military underwent several dive missions in a number of lakes to try and even look for these ghost missiles, but they found nothing other than, I guess, like craters and slightly disturbed aquatic life. The military opinion from both Sweden and the United States was not officially decided upon, but a declassified document from the time suggests that some were convinced that they were alien flying saucers. By 1947, the ghost rockets had stopped, so what were they? War nerves or aliens? You decide at number 6. We have the infamous Battle of Los Angeles. Between February the 24th and 25th, 1942, just a few months after Pearl Harbor, a large number of flared and bright lights were reported near defense stations in LA. It seems that naval intelligence on the Californian coast warned of a potential attack that evening, and military radar suggested that there was indeed enemy contact. fact. People were freaked out, the city was blackened and air raid sirens sounded. Strange lights were spotted in the sky over Santa Monica, leading to troops firing machine guns into the sky. One coastal artilleryman claimed to have seen 6 planes, but after 1,400 rounds of anti-aircraft ammunition fired into the sky, nothing was ever shot down. There was no attack. Or was there? Secretary of War Henry Stimson echoed Army brass in saying that at least 15 planes had buzzed into this city. Some people concluded that it was psychological warfare on the part of the Japanese. Others straight up believed that it was aliens. Those pesky aliens. We have viral aliens up next at number 5. We have the USS Nimitz Incident. Objects were detected in restricted military training airspaces in November 2004, and video was subsequently released of a Navy fighter jet interception of a UFO over the Pacific Ocean. The footage was leaked to the press in 2017 and quickly went viral, but many were quick to claim that it just wasn't authentic. However, just a couple of days ago, as of the scripting of this video in 2019, the United States Navy have actually confirmed that the video is authentic and does include unidentified flying objects. The Navy is trying to update their protocol for pilots reporting UFOs in order to reduce the stigma. We still have absolutely no idea what the UFO was. Coming into number 4, we have 2014 to 2015. Get ready, because this is heavy. An article in Rolling Stone magazine claimed that the United States Navy had reported UFOs on a near daily basis between Virginia and Florida in 2014 and 2015. This also seemed to be confirmed by the New York Times. Now, the sightings began in the summer of 2014 when Navy pilots reported UFOs 30,000 feet into the sky, reaching hypersonic speeds as they were conducting training maneuvers below. According to Lieutenant Danny Acoyne, the objects had no distinct wing, no distinct tail, no distinct exhaust pipe. He continued by saying it seemed as if the objects were aware of their presence because they would actively move around them. Further to that, at the same time, further Navy pilots were reporting an influx of unidentified flying objects off the east coast to the Pentagon. What was going on? Coming into number 3, we have the Kinross Incident. In November 1953, a United States Air Force pilot disappeared after investigating a UFO over Lake Superior on the border to Canada. Felix Monclar scrambled an F-89C Scorpion jet from the Kinross Air Force Base with another member of the Air Force, Robert Wilson, acting as a radar operator down below. Ground control claims that the UFO and the plane grew close on the radar screen. They were going towards each other, and then at one point they even seemed to merge. The then unidentified object continued its previous course and the plane disappeared. Searches were sent out for it. It was never found. A search was indeed conducted, and it seems that parts of the plane may have been uncovered several years later in 1968, but the identity of the parts was never published. Many think it was all a ruse. The body of Monclar was never found, and neither was any trace of the UFO, so we just don't know what happened that night. There have been a number of military whistleblowers over the years. At number 2, I want to talk about Charles Hall and the Tall Whites. Charles Hall used to serve in the United States military as part of the Air Force, stationed in, wait for it, Nevada, aka the home of Area 51. Although it seems that Hall, who worked as a meteorologist, was actually based at the Nellis Air Force Base, which was around an hour away from Area 51, but still. Hall claims that back in the 1960s, the Air Force were actually in cahoots with aliens. He said that the United States military exchanged technology with quote-unquote tall whites, a blonde-haired human-like race of aliens. Hall continued by saying that there was a hangar at the base. Now I quote, "A ship would come into the side of the mountain on the nights of a full moon." I mean, what? Hall also claimed that aliens would travel with CIA agents to Las Vegas casinos for entertainment. Rightio then. That actually does go hand in hand with a lot of other alien conspiracy theories out there though. A lot of people do think that the government have been working with aliens for a long time. I honestly don't know what to say about the Las Vegas bit though. Even crazier at number 1, this comes from Canada's former Defence Minister Paul Hellyer, so how can we argue? This is crazy, hold on to your hats, because if not, they're getting blown away. Paul Hellyer used to hold one of the top jobs in Canada. He's an engineer with a long career in politics and military logistics. The man claims to have helped found the International UFO Landing Pad in Alberta. In 2005, he claimed to have seen UFO for himself, and in 2014, he confirmed the existence of tall whites. He said that he was aware of at least 4 species of aliens that have been visiting planet Earth for thousands of years. He claimed that 2 of the species are directly working with the United States. He also claimed that the different species are from different places and they should not be considered as one entity because they have different agendas. He says that the aliens that humans have encountered do not think that we're good stewards of our planet, and I'm inclined to agree. Hellyer is still a member of the Privy Council in Canada and is, by and large, a very credible source.